Hi everyone, welcome back to our remote learning. This will be our second session doing this, and today I'm going to cover perspective, being one of the most important aspects of realism in drawing because it's how we create the illusion of depth. There is some reading to be done on the subject of perspective. I posted it as usual. This will sort of be how we do things every week. We repeat this process. I'll post some type of reading, usually has some embedded images, some terms I want you to commit to memory so that when I'm talking about certain things, you know what I'm talking about. Please read over that before this part. The video is always going to be more of a demonstration of what I'd like you to do. The reading is to fulfill the requirement of giving you some theory behind the practice. It's good to read that first so you kind of got all these ideas in your head. That way, when you watch me, you'll hear some of those terms repeated and they'll make more sense. Perspective. It's probably the thing that frustrates artists the most because it's so much structural line work. I guess it runs the opposite way that most artists want to go. They want to be expressive and loose and freewheeling, and perspective requires you to kind of work in all these structural lines, but they're important. They give a foundation, a skeleton to everything else that you're drawing that you can work on top of. We've already done that with the still life. We did a draft and we worked on top of it. We're going to do the same thing this time. We're still repeating aspects of the same process. We're just approaching it a little bit differently. We started with the micro. We looked at the little things, the still life, something small. Now we're going to the macro, something larger, an environment of some sort. Eventually I'm going to ask you to do your own project based around perspective, but for today, I just want to run you through some quick sketches that will help to solidify this in your mind. As visual learners, it's good for us to do these sketches because things make more sense sometimes when we read them, hear them, watch somebody do them, and then repeat them ourselves. I've got a half piece of multimedia drawing paper here, roughly 9 by 12, maybe a little bit larger. You can work in your sketchbooks on this if you want, if that's what you have, if that's what you have access to. Maybe some of you took your larger drawing paper home, and if you did, good for you. That means you'll be able to work larger, and I always recommend working larger. If you have the bigger paper, go for it. If not, not a big deal. You can work in your sketchbooks on this. So here I have my picture plane, and we need to imagine this as though it's a three-dimensional space. We can create the illusion that this is three-dimensional. And one real easy way to start doing that is if we just look at the shape itself, the shape of this rectangle, and we sort of sketch in the same shape inside of our paper. And this isn't going to be straight because I'm not using a ruler. Those of you who have rulers or a straight edge, please use it. It will make all of this look much better. So I've got the basic rectangle figured out here, kind of mimicking the dimensions of my page, and then I'm just going to take each of the corners and just draw a diagonal line to each corner. Okay, so now it looks like we're looking inside of a box. That's essentially what perspective is. This part of the box looks smaller because it's further away, and we could take this even further. We can go inside of that same shape, mimic it once again, and then draw more diagonals. And it just keeps getting deeper and deeper. It becomes like this tunnel that we're looking into. What I'm doing here is just taking the actual shape and making it essentially into a cube, something you guys have already done with still life when you're breaking your objects down. When you're drawing an environment, you have to find certain things and define them so that you know where everything's supposed to line up. If I were to take my pencil, I'm always holding it the correct way so that I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to draw a relatively straight line across the middle here. So you can see I'm going to go over it a couple times just to reinforce. Okay, this is going to be my horizon line. Horizon line is one of the three most important aspects of drawing perspective, and you got to start with that because it's a huge part of your composition. Now I have to determine where my vanishing point is, the point to which all the quote-unquote orthogonals disappear to. All those are is right angle lines. These diagonal lines are orthogonals. They're going to be vanishing to a vanishing point somewhere along this horizon line. And I'm just going to put it right here. I'll put an X there so you can kind of see that that's where I'm going to eventually bring everything to bear. I'm going to put everything going in that direction. What I could do is just draw radiant lines from that vanishing point. This is just like you're creating a template. We're just sketching for the sake of sketching right now. Since drawing is a form of thinking, we're thinking our way around this process of creating perspective, what it actually means. So just draw radiating lines from your vanishing point. So now I have all these lines, and they're promoting the idea that this is in the distance, and everything else that I would put in the picture plane is going to vanish to that point. Let's say I have a building over here, and I'm just going to draw this as though it's the basic shape of the building. Maybe it's like a rectangle, okay? And I can just see part of the side of it. What's going to happen once I get it in there is that all my edges, if I draw a line to that vanishing point, they're going to line up with it, okay? So I'm going to do these a little bit dark so you can really see what I'm doing here. And you could always draw through the object to make sure that things line up as they're supposed to. Again, using a ruler for this is going to make it less sloppy. You're not going to have to keep going over things over and over again in order to get it to look just right. So you can see now that this shape appears as though it's gradually making its way back into the distance to where this vanishing point is, and then meeting with the horizon line. Okay? So that's the idea of taking an object in space and making sure that it fits in the space by way of the perspective. Okay, let's draw a smaller one over here. I'm going to do a small square on this side. Same thing as before, taking all of my edges, the corners, and making sure that they converge to that distant vanishing point. There's one on top. It's a little bit thinner, harder to see part of the top of that, but you see what I'm doing here. Now that looks like it's projecting out of the space. Now if I wanted to, I could maybe cut out a slice of this. Maybe I'll put a line like this, and a line like this. These are called transverse lines. They run opposite the direction that all of our orthogonals do. They're there to build the structure of the space so that we can cut things off and make sure they look like they belong there. So I've chopped that part of it off, and maybe if I wanted to, I'm going to do this as sort of the symbolic shape of a house, like a roof. I'm doing this at an angle. It's a triangle shape. So there, I've got a roof on my house there, and it looks like it's receding into space. Same thing here, though. The top of the triangle, this angle, is receding to that vanishing point in order to appear as though it belongs in the space and to create that illusion of depth. The one example that I gave in the reading that you've probably seen before at some point is the train tracks that recede to the vanishing point. The rails on the track are larger and spaced further apart, and as they get further and further into the distance, they get closer and closer until you can't see them anymore. This is an example of one-point perspective. So I would recommend, in order to get a grasp on this, that you consider doing this in your sketchbook. Just draw an example of one-point perspective. Draw your horizon line, that's the first thing. Figure out where your vanishing point is, and then add some of these radiant lines for guides. Once you've got the guides in there, go somewhere in this space and draw some type of a shape. It could be a circle, it could be a square, it could be a triangle, it could be a rectangle. And then just from the edges, make sure that you're drawing lines, orthogonal lines to vanish to your vanishing point. And then consider taking a chunk out and drawing through. Look, now it looks like there's a cylinder here, and it's going back into space. I'm going to go over this with a marker so you can see it a little bit better. One-point perspective is the easiest one to achieve because there's only one point for everything to vanish to. That vanishing point right there. I put a little dot there so you can see it. I'm just going to go over top of some of these objects so that you can see them a little bit better and see that they are promoting the idea of deep space. So going over top of my lines, and again, if you're using a ruler, yours is going to look better than mine, because I'm trying to do this off the cuff and loose and freehand. Put my house in here. The line for my gutter, my roof. Here's that cylinder that I just did. I'm just going to go over my horizon line. And I can bring out that, maybe it's a street running down in between these buildings. Maybe this is the sidewalk here. The building's a little too close to the road, but you get the idea. So that is 1 point perspective. 1 point, 1 vanishing point. And this time, we're going to do 2 points. 2 point perspective means 2 vanishing points. So I'm going to start out pretty much the same way I did before. I'm going to put in that horizon line. Make sure it's nice and heavy so I can see exactly where I'm going to place it. Place everything, and then I'm going to add vanishing points here and there. Now the example that was given in the reading would be to stand on the corner of a street and look at the buildings running one way and the other towards a horizon line. So if I were to draw a transverse line straight up and down here, and then take the top and bottom and connect them either side to my vanishing points, and then chop it off certain areas like so. Add some more of these transverse lines. And then what I'm going to have to do with these lines that are separating these masses is make sure that they actually vanish to the opposing vanishing points. And this is why it's good to use a ruler. Use a ruler if you have one. It makes this a lot easier. Now, I can't apply a lot of pressure because I'm working on a standing easel right now. If I had it buttressed up against something, I could, but all I have to do for these lines is draw one nice solid line. So having the ruler is going to be to your advantage. So use it if you have it. I'm just chopping these new buildings out that I'm creating. You know, it doesn't always have to be buildings. It could be like a fence post. Maybe this is the corner of a fence, for example, running off into the distance. Maybe you have a tree line here. There's some trees, and as they recede into the distance, they get smaller and smaller. The roof of my building, I come over like this. Again, drawing through to my vanishing points to make sure that everything lines up. Maybe I have a building in the foreground here. We went over here and reinforce that illusion of depth and space. Maybe I can put in a sidewalk running the whole way around. And I put a street lamp in there. But you get the idea. There's some clouds. There's some sunshine. So I inked the lines so you can see them a little bit better. Just sort of symbolic shapes for trees and buildings and my fence post here. So that's 2 point perspective. 2 vanishing points, 2 point perspective. And you can have fun with this. You know, it doesn't have to feel rigid. There is some joy in the creation of that deep space because once you've created it, you can put all sorts of things in there. Let's do one more of these. So this is going to be the hardest one to get a handle on, and it's probably the one you see the least often unless you stand on top of buildings a lot or you're very, very short. 3 point perspective is when you're looking at something from either a bird's eye view or a worm's eye view. So everything becomes diagonal. The transverse lines are no longer there like they were in both 1 and 2 point perspective where we drew lines to create structure and then we drew the orthogonals to help everything look like it was vanishing to a vanishing point. In this case, everything's going to be vanishing to a vanishing point. So just as an example, let's say we were standing at the base of a really tall building looking up. And maybe our vanishing point for the top of the building is somewhere up here. But there's also a horizon line. It still exists. And there's also going to be vanishing points down here somewhere and down here somewhere. So it's like a triangle. So everything is now on a diagonal. To draw those lines in so that we have a guide for what we're doing, now I'm going to imagine that I'm looking up at a really tall building. So, I could hack off part of the top of that, make it square. It's still receding to a proposed vanishing point, and everything else that's back here, it's hidden behind the building, is going to be vanishing to one of these points as well. Now, it looks like one-point perspective right now, but you can imagine that if we're putting other buildings in here, and we probably would need more space for this. We would need a larger piece of paper so I could actually see all of these separate buildings lining up. They're all going to recede to one of our three vanishing points. And I'm just kind of blocking these in using multiplanar perspective a little bit here. I'm not being super accurate because I'm not using a ruler. If I was, this would probably look a little bit better. But here's the idea that we're looking up. And I just put someone's head in here. There's their ears and their shoulders, looking up at this very tall building. This is an example of worm's eye view. We're looking up into the clouds at the top of this very tall structure. Got these other ones beside to help reinforce that space, that illusion, that everything is receding to a point. So what if we took this and flipped it upside down? And imagine that instead of standing below a building and looking up, what if we were standing on top of the building? Maybe we are up on the roof of this building, and this ends way down here. Somewhere down here is going to be my vanishing point, where all this stuff is going to terminate off the page, but I'm giving my building a base so that it looks like it's actually sitting on the ground, not just floating in the air. And now I've created a bird's eye view. You can do this same thing with all the other buildings, kind of make them come out from the sides. It's still vanishing to our imaginary vanishing point, wherever it is way down here. And you'll see maybe the tops of some of these buildings. But the idea is that everything is in agreement. Everything is flowing to this point down here. But there are also going to be vanishing points somewhere up here, wherever my horizon lies. It looks like I've decided my horizon line's like here. Okay? So all of these lines, if I were going to shore them up and make them look a little bit more convincing, would have to vanish to 1, 2, or 3, one of these 3 vanishing points. Now that's a little sloppy, I apologize for that, but I am using a marker and I'm not using a ruler, so it makes it a little bit more challenging for me to depict this, but I think you get the idea. This is the most challenging one to do, like I said, because it's an extreme point of view and you don't see it that often. It's not something you regularly walk out and see unless you work in a tall office building or something like that. So 3-point is worm's eye view, bird's eye view, no more transverse lines, everything's on the orthogonal. That's really all there is to it. Now it's just applying this to all the other ways that you could use it. But before we get into doing anything like that, and before I ask you to do a project based on perspective, I think it would be good for you just to draw these in your sketchbook. Now there are examples of it in the reading, so you can refer to those, or you can watch the video and draw along with me, or you can watch the video, wait till I'm done, then go back and do them on your own, whatever works for you. It's the nice thing about this remote learning experience is everybody can do what they need to do for themselves, work in their own time. As long as you meet the deadline, you're in good shape. So between now and the next time, I would like you to draw each of these, an example of each in your sketchbook. Other than that, I don't really have anything else more to show you today. This is just practice. Now you're going to have an opportunity to try it. Draft it out in your sketchbook and just do the best you can. And then we'll move on from there. We'll have something else to do pertaining to perspective next time. Okay, so everybody be well, and we'll see you next time.